正式登陆 Astro 平台，观众可以分别通过 Astro 频道505及806收看。这节新闻报道完毕，感谢收看，我是杨怡婷 ，Malaysia Madani Kesejahteraan Dinikmati， 我们再会。
Elektrik 5 bintang memberikan perkhidmatan 5 bintang.
Berhenti memandu jika anda microslip.
Good afternoon and Salam Malaysia Madani. Thanks for tuning in. You're watching World Today with me, Olivia Nicholas. Before we begin, let's take a quick look at some of the stories we are following. Trump has threatened to bomb Oman if it gets in the way of a US deal with Iran on the Strait of Hormuz. Trump also said Iran should put up the white flag of surrender, claiming that Tehran would not make the deal he thinks is needed to end the war. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said he plans to speak with President Donald Trump before new tariffs are imposed on Canada. Carney said he expects negotiations with the US to move forward over the next 48 hours. The body of former Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji will be cremated in Beijing on Tuesday. National flags will fly at half-mast at Tiananmen Square and other locations across China to mark the occasion. Thailand's economic growth weakened in the second quarter. A slowdown in private consumption and government spending offset surging private investment and sustained export gains. For the first half of the year, the Thai economy grew 2.4% annually. Apple is making changes to its iPhone app tracking prompt in European countries. The decision comes following criticism from competition regulators and pushback from the advertising industry. This brings an investigation by Germany's Federal Cartel Office to an end. President Donald Trump has threatened to bomb Oman if it gets in the way of a U.S. deal with Iran on the Strait of Hormuz. He also called for Iran to surrender. Iranian and Omani officials have been talking for weeks on future maritime navigation arrangements through the shipping route. The Foreign Ministry in Tehran noted that the two sides are working on a joint declaration. However, Trump has repeatedly insisted that the strait is under U.S. control despite traffic remaining throttled. He warned that the U.S. would bomb Oman if it gets in the way of reopening the critical waterway. Trump also said Iran should put up the white flag of surrender, claiming that Tehran would not make the deal he thinks is needed to end the war. He insisted that he is in no hurry to reach a deal despite the deep unpopularity of the war among Americans ahead of November midterm elections in the U.S. The president claimed that the midterms are not impacting his strategy on Iran. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghei said the 60-day deadline for talks with the U.S. following the 17th of June Memorandum of Understanding lost its relevance after flagrant violations by Washington. He said there is no provision in the Memorandum of Understanding referring to a 60-day deadline, and Iran never formulates its policies under pressure, ultimatums or time limits. He added the memorandum instead envisaged a 60-day period for negotiations on two matters, the lifting of sanctions and the nuclear issue, which could have been extended if no agreement was reached. He further said due to the widespread violation of the memorandum by the US, no dialogue was started just a few weeks after its signing. As a result, he said the discussion of the 60-day deadline completely lost its relevance. The spokesman claimed that the US sanctions have no impact on Iran, saying the main obstacle to resolving the disputes is not a lack of mediators. He said it is entirely natural for some European countries to indicate their readiness in bilateral contacts to offer their good offices. However, this does not mean that a new mediator has emerged or been accepted in the course of Iran-US relations. On a related note, US President Donald Trump said he is not seeking an extension of the June MOU framework agreement with Iran aimed at ending the war. Asked whether the two sides are closer to reaching a final agreement, Trump claimed that Iran is willing to negotiate but is not prepared to accept the terms he believes are required. He reiterated that Iran could not be allowed to possess nuclear weapons. Commenting on his recent statement that he would soon declare the Strait of Hormuz U.S. territory, he said the U.S. blockade had been effective. He claimed that American actions are allowing millions of barrels of oil to move through the region each week. President Donald Trump claimed that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had responded to his overtures after Trump ordered the U.S. to scale back military exercises with South Korea. Trump said he is making the situation much safer through his ties to Kim, whom he met several times in his first spell in the White House.
You see, I'm actually making it much safer. Kim Jong-un has always treated me with great respect, and we met on numerous occasions, actually, two primary occasions, spoken and spent time. I understand him, he understands me. You're doing war games. I get along with him.
Trump previously took aim at South Korea, abruptly announcing that he had ordered the Pentagon to scale back inappropriate military drills in Seoul. He also linked the decision to South Korea's refusal to help with the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran. South Korean officials said the exercises had begun as planned, and they hoped the personal chemistry between Trump and Kim would bring them back to talks. North Korea has not responded publicly, though it has previously voiced anger at the regular joint maneuvers that take place in the south. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said he plans to speak with US President Donald Trump before the 19th of August, the date when Trump has threatened to impose new tariffs on Canada. Carney said he expects negotiations with the US to move forward over the next 48 hours.
I'm sure the first thing we'll talk about is this historic investment, and I say that in all seriousness. Frankly, we'll have opportunities over the next 48 hours to discuss in more detail as the negotiations go forward, and I think that's the best forum.
Canada has intensified its meetings with U.S. trade officials as Carney tries to evade a looming new 50% tariffs on a wide range of products. They try to resolve several long-standing trade irritants between the North American neighbors. This includes Canada's retaliatory duties on some U.S.-built autos and steel, and U.S. complaints about Canada's allocation of dairy import quotas. The negotiations are separate from broader talks about renewing the trilateral U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement on trade. The U.S. is currently negotiating with Mexico on the matter. The United Nations warned of an alarming intensification of violence in southern Lebanon over the weekend. The Lebanese Health Ministry said at least 11 people were killed in Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon on Saturday, some of the deadliest in weeks. UN spokesperson Stefan Durajic said families had fled areas to which they had only recently returned, underscoring the fragility of conditions for civilians. He added peacekeepers continue to face movement restrictions and aggressive behavior.
Some of this violence has displaced families from areas where they had only recently returned, prompting them to seek safety elsewhere. The situation remains very fragile for many families. Civilians must be able to return home safely. They must be able to do it voluntarily and with dignity. And they must be able to do it without repeatedly being exposed to renewed displacement, as we are seeing.
He urged the parties to exercise maximum restraint, adhere to the latest ceasefire and pursue dialogue through direct talks to advance a long-term solution to the conflicts. The body of former Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji, who died on August 12 at the age of 97, will be cremated in Beijing on Tuesday. National flags will fly at half-mast at Tiananmen Square and other locations across China to mark the occasion. Zhu served as the Premier of China for one term from 1998 to 2003. His time in office coincided with China's period of double-digit economic growth. His criticism of Mao Zedong's economic policies led him to be identified as the rightist in 1958 and was persecuted until Mao died in 1976. Sent to the countryside during the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, he gradually worked his way up through the ranks after being politically rehabilitated. Zhu was appointed Shanghai mayor in 1987, overseeing his first steps into becoming the global financial hub it is today. Moving to Beijing in 1991 to work for the central government, he helped push the reforms that transformed China in the early 1990s to an emerging superpower with economic growth rates envied by other governments. However, by no means did all Chinese observers think Zhu's tenure was an unalloyed success. Some said missteps in grains policy, tax distribution and state factory shutdowns left messes that his successors had to clean up in quieter ways. Coming up next, Russia's Supreme Court upholds only anti-war parties' election ban.
Dalam dunia yang bergerak pantas, siapa yang benar? Di sinilah anda kembali kepada sumber yang diyakini. Reka letak moden, akses lebih lancar, ringkasan AI, chatbot interaktif, akses tanpa sempadan. Portal Berita RTM, benar, tepat dan dipercayai.
Kita anak merdeka dan kitalah penjaga maruah bangsa. Janji.
Thailand's economic growth weakened in the second quarter as a slowdown in private consumption and government spending offset surging private investment and sustained export gains. The country's gross domestic product in the period grew 1.9% from a year earlier, decelerating from a 2.8% rise in the previous quarter. On a quarterly basis, GDP declined a seasonally adjusted 0.2% in the second quarter, reversing from a revised 0.6% increase in the earlier 3 months. Private consumption rose 1.9% year-on-year, but down from 3.3% in the previous quarter, in line with the deceleration in spending across most categories. Government expenditure, meanwhile, expanded 0.2%. Public investment fell 1.6%, marking the first contraction in the 3 quarters, compared to a 9.4% expansion in the first quarter. Despite that, private investment soared 13.4%, quickening from a 10.1% in the previous quarter and registering the highest growth in 54 quarters. Export value increased 17.6% to $99.08 billion, matching the previous quarter's rate. For the first half of the year, the Thai economy grew 2.4% annually. Russia's Supreme Court on Monday rejected an appeal by the anti-war Yabloko party against a ruling last week that bans it from taking part in a parliamentary election next month. Last week, the court removed Yabloko from the ballot, upholding a suit brought by a nationalist party which blasted the rival for its peace stance and accused it for receiving foreign funding and copyright violations. Speaking of the hearing, Yabloko leader Nikolai Rybakov said that the party will further try to overrule the Supreme Court's decision and ensure its participation in September election. The court imposed the ban 1 week ago, sidelining the only registered political party that is calling for an end to Russia's war in Ukraine. The lawsuit against Yabloko was filed by Rodina, a small pro-Kremlin nationalist party. Rodina's leader accused Yabloko of being a Western-backed movement seeking to undermine both the election process and Russia itself. Yabloko rejects that says it speaks on behalf of millions of Russians in seeking an end to the war. Apple is making changes to its iPhone app tracking prompt in European countries following criticism from competition regulators and pushback from the advertising industry. This brings an investigation by Germany's Federal Cartel Office to an end. The prompt allows users to stop apps from collecting their activity across other services for advertising purposes. The advertising industry has opposed it, while Apple points to users' right to privacy. The German Cartel Office expressed concern that Apple was imposing more stringent requirements on third-party app providers than on its own services. Under Germany's data laws for large digital companies, a company cannot treat its own offerings better than those of its competitors. The new version of the prompt will only be shown to users who are currently in the European Union, regardless of their country of origin. The changes include removing the word tracking from the selection page. App operators will also be able to ask users again after a year for permission to track their activity across other apps and websites. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva hailed the discovery of oil near the Amazon coast as a passport to the future, despite strong opposition to drilling in the area from environmentalists. Oil giant Petrobras last week announced it had identified the presence of hydrocarbons off the coast of northern Amapá state nearly a year after it began drilling.
Repetir, isso aqui pode chamar passaporte para o futuro desse país. E quando eu falo passaporte para o futuro desse país, eu não estou negando a minha luta para que um dia a gente não precise utilizar combustível fóssil, porque o país vai continuar sendo o país rei da inovação nos biocombustíveis.
The president supports the gradual phasing out of fossil fuels to curb climate change. However, he believes Brazil needs oil revenues to fund the transition to clean energy and achieve energy sovereignty. The oil was found in a maritime region known as the equatorial margin, about 175 kilometers off the Amazon coast. Petrobras President Magda Chambriard said another 15 to 20 days of drilling are needed to determine the size of the field. Environmentalists argue that drilling threatens a region rich in biodiversity situated off the coast of the world's largest rainforest. Greece plans to pay back some 13 billion euros in debt ahead of schedule this year, sparing it from being the most unindebted EU nation. The debts were incurred during Greece's 2010 financial crisis, and the repayments will bring Greece's debt as a percentage of its economy below Italy's. The country's finance ministry said, taking advantage of a budget surplus, Greece aims to reduce its debt to GDP ratio to 137% this year. Italy projects that its debt will reach 138.6% of GDP this year, while France is in third place among European Union countries at about 118%. Greek debt stood at 210% of GDP in 2020, but between 2019 and last year, it made early loan repayments amounting to approximately 36 billion euros. The country's public debt currently stands at approximately 363 billion euros. The ministry aims to fully repay the loans by 2031 rather than 2041 as originally scheduled. It said the Greek state is sending a further signal to reassure institutions, rating agencies and the international investor community. Still to come in sports, Harry Kane to focus on upcoming season, undistracted by possible Ballon d'Or success.
Kemerdekaan adalah apabila hati memilih untuk terus bersatu. Janji.
Semangat wajah kan ku bertaruhkan nyawa demi sejahtera semua negaraku yang merdeka.
That wraps up this afternoon's edition of World Today. Until next time, I'm Olivia Nicholas, Malaysia Madani, kesejahteraan dinikmati. Thank you for watching. Have a pleasant afternoon, Malaysia.
Berjanji dan ku bersumpah setia demi Tuhan dan negara akan ku korbankan jiwa. Aku berjanji akan satukan semua, kita bertahan bersama tanah air yang tercinta.